217 kilometers from shore. No boat, no life jacket, just a single German shepherd, swimming for his life. A fisherman scanned the endless ocean, the sun blazing overhead. Something bobbed in the distance. Driftwood, he assumed. But as he drew closer, his heart nearly stopped. A dog, soaked, exhausted, fighting to stay above water. Alone in the vast, merciless sea, no one could explain how he got there. But what happened next defied every expectation. EXT, open sea. Day, the ocean was calm, deceptively calm, the kind of eerie stillness that made seasoned fishermen uneasy, the kind that always came before a storm. Miles off the Florida coast, 42-year-old Thomas Grady piloted his modest fishing vessel through open waters. He'd left before sunrise chasing tuna. 6 hours in, all he'd caught was a sunburn and silence. Then he saw it. At first, just driftwood, until it moved, fighting the tide instead of floating with it. Something wasn't right. Thomas grabbed his binoculars, his chest clenched. It was a dog, a German shepherd, barely keeping his head above the water. Alone. No boat nearby, no land in sight. His stomach dropped. Thomas, muttering, "How the hell?" Without hesitation, Thomas throttled the boat toward him. As he got closer, the scene turned dire. The dog's paddling was slow, erratic. His head bobbed with each wave. His mouth barely cleared the surface. He had minutes, maybe seconds, left. Thomas cut the engine. "Thomas, hang in there, buddy. I've got you." No response. The dog was too far gone, eyes glazed, muscles failing. Thomas ripped off his shirt, tossed a rope ladder overboard, and dove into the icy water. Salt stung his eyes. The cold was sharper than expected. He powered through the swells, never losing sight of the shepherd. When he finally reached him, the dog's legs gave out, collapsing into his arms like dead weight. Thomas kicked hard with one leg, holding the dog with the other. They reached the ladder. Thomas pushed from beneath while the shepherd instinctively clawed upward, then collapsed onto the deck, trembling. Thomas followed, panting hard. Kneeling beside the animal, he gently brushed the water from his face. The dog's chest was barely rising. His fur was salted and tangled, his paws raw, still breathing, still alive. Thomas whispering, "You crazy, beautiful beast, that you're alive." He wrapped the dog in a dry tarp and set a bottle of water nearby. The shepherd didn't move. Thomas sat beside him, drenched and shaking, not from the cold, but from the sheer impossibility of what he'd just seen. "Thomas, what were you doing out here, boy?" The dog didn't answer, but in those amber eyes something flickered. Not fear, not pain, something else. A will to survive. Indit id fishing boat. Later, Thomas steered toward the nearest marina, 2 hours away. The sun had shifted, casting gold across the waves. The dog shivered, unmoving. No collar, no harness, no tracker. Just raw skin under his front legs, like he'd been swimming for hours, maybe longer. Thomas had seen dogs dumped before, but not this far out. 217 kilometers? This was something else. He placed a hand on the shepherd's back. "Thomas." "You got a name, boy?" No response, just faint, quiet eyes. When they reached land, Thomas didn't head to animal control. Something in him resisted. Instead, he carried the limp dog to his truck and drove to a small vet clinic outside Clearwater. "Receptionist, sir, you can't just—" "Thomas." He almost drowned. 135 miles out, no ID, no explanation, just look at him. Silence. A young vet appeared, eyes wide. "Vet, you said 135 miles offshore?" Thomas nodded. Within seconds, the shepherd was rushed to the back. Thomas sat, dripping seawater and worry. He didn't know why he felt so attached already. Maybe it was the fact the dog hadn't given up, even when the world said he should. 20 minutes later, Vet, he's severely dehydrated, scraped up, exhausted beyond belief, but, pause. His heart is strong. Somehow he made it. Thomas exhaled. Thank God. Vet, no chip. But we did find something. She handed him a rusted piece of metal, a fragment of a broken dog tag. Only one letter remained. N.T. Thomas's cabin. Night. Thomas's home was modest. One bedroom near the water, peeling paint. An old dock out back. He laid the dog on a folded blanket, water nearby. The shepherd wouldn't eat, but he watched Thomas. Always watching. Thomas, you made it through something no dog should have survived. I don't know how or why. But I'm not letting you go. A blink, not trust. But something was growing. Int. Cabin. Morning claws on the floor. Thomas jolted awake. The shepherd standing, weak, favoring one leg, but moving. Thomas, hey, look at you. The dog didn't wag, didn't leap with joy. But he looked at Thomas and blinked once. Thomas set out fresh water and chicken. The shepherd sniffed, then ate. Slowly, carefully, Thomas. You're not just smart. You're trained. I can feel it. There was a calm to him, deliberate, silent, calculating, like a soldier. Ext. Dock, later. Thomas stood at the edge, salt wind in his face. The shepherd stood beside him, gazing at the sea. Thomas, you've seen things, haven't you? Int. Cabin. Later that day, Thomas made a call. Thomas Mike. I need you to meet someone. Mike, a retired K-9 handler, arrived that afternoon. He knelt silently. The shepherd tensed, but didn't attack. Mike, sit. No response. He extended 2 fingers, palm down, then curved them slightly. The dog immediately dropped to the floor. Thomas's eyes widened. Thomas, what was that? Mike's silent signal. Tactical. This dog wasn't trained to sit. He was trained to survive. Thomas, so why would a trained dog be 135 miles offshore? Mike didn't answer. Because the real question was worse. Who sent him there? And why? A soft exhale. Not quite a sigh, but close. That night they both slept lightly, ears and senses alert. At sunrise, Thomas took Ranger down to the dock. He had one last plan. And it was dangerous. I'm going to find out who deployed you, he said, tightening the straps on a dry bag. But they'll be looking for you now, so you'll need to stay hidden. He hesitated, unless you want out. Ranger tilted his head. You've been through enough. I wouldn't blame you if you disappeared into the forest and never looked back. But Ranger stepped forward and placed his body between Thomas and the edge of the dock, blocking him. No? Thomas asked. Ranger looked straight into his eyes. No words needed. Thomas smiled faintly. All right, partner. They loaded onto a small boat stashed behind the pier. Thomas had used it for dives years ago. Fast, silent, and barely legal. It was old, but reliable. As the boat pulled away, Thomas scanned the shoreline. There, half hidden by trees, was the black SUV. He cursed under his breath. They had tracked the truck. Ranger stood at the front of the boat, wind pushing through his fur, eyes sharp and locked on the shore. Then the SUV's passenger door opened. A figure stepped out, dressed in black, face hidden by a cap and glasses. He raised a phone and spoke into it. Suddenly, Ranger let out a bark, not of fear, but recognition. Thomas looked at him. You know him? Ranger barked again, louder this time, then turned in a tight circle on the deck, agitated. Is he your handler? No answer, just focused pacing. Thomas turned the boat hard toward the open water. We're not ready for that, he muttered. Not yet. Ranger sat down, but never looked away from the vanishing figure. Whoever that man was, friend or enemy, one thing was now certain. Ranger remembered. And soon, so would the world. The ocean was rougher than expected. Thomas tightened his grip on the wheel as the small boat pitched over a wave, the engine groaning under the strain. Ranger stood beside him, paws steady, gaze locked on the horizon. Neither had spoken for nearly an hour, but the weight between them was heavy. Ranger was no longer just a mystery. He was a piece of something bigger, something dangerous. Thomas pulled into a hidden cove he had used during his diving years. Jagged cliffs surrounded it, accessible only by water or through miles of overgrown brush, perfect for hiding. He killed the engine and let the silence settle. "All right," he muttered, tossing a rope to the rocky shore. "Time for answers." He opened the dry bag and pulled out the printed file, Asset R7. Thomas sat on the boat's bench and read it again. There were no names, no locations, just tactical terms, a coded mission summary, and a chilling final entry. Terminated due to compromise. Terminated. They had meant to kill him. And yet Ranger had survived. Not by accident, by will, by instinct, by refusing to drown. Thomas reached into the bag again and pulled out the broken tag they'd found tangled in Ranger's fur. It was still crusted with salt. The R barely visible. "Ranger," Thomas whispered, "is that what they called you, or what you became?" The dog looked at him, not blankly, not like a pet, but as something more, as a partner. Suddenly Ranger stood and walked to the bow, ears up, not in fear but awareness. Thomas followed his gaze. Far off, a helicopter, black, silent, fast. "How did they find us again?" Ranger let out a low whine, then jumped off the boat and onto the rocks. He ran toward a crevice in the cliff where a narrow path wound upward. Without thinking, Thomas followed. At the top of the trail, they crouched behind a boulder. The helicopter hovered for a moment, then descended several hundred meters away. Doors opened. 4 figures in black gear emerged. Helmets, visors, no insignia, but the 5th figure stood out. No mask, no helmet, just a weathered face and a calm stance. Ranger froze. Thomas looked down at him. "You know him, don't you?" The shepherd's tail lowered. His eyes locked on the man. "I think I found your handler." The man scanned the area, then pulled something from his pocket. A small device. He pressed a button. A high-pitched pulse, almost too soft for human ears, vibrated in the air. Ranger flinched. He stumbled backward, whimpering. Hey, what's happening?" Thomas grabbed his fur, trying to steady him. Ranger shook his head, pawed at his ears. Pain, confusion. Thomas turned to the man and the device. "They're trying to override you." The handler raised his hand, pointing directly at the cliff. No words, just a signal. Seconds later, 2 armed figures started up the path. Thomas grabbed Ranger by the harness. "We're leaving. Now." But Ranger didn't move. He looked up at Thomas, torn. Something inside him was still responding to the signal. Old commands, old bonds. "I know it hurts," Thomas said, voice tight, "but you get to choose who you are now, not them." The sound intensified. Ranger whimpered again, trembling violently. And then he barked, a single, sharp bark that echoed off the cliffs. He turned, lunged forward, and began to run. Not down the trail, but toward the helicopter. "Wait! Ranger!" Thomas shouted. But he understood. Ranger wasn't running back to them. He was running to end it. Thomas followed, adrenaline flooding his system. He kept his distance, heart pounding. Ranger reached the clearing just as the 2 armed men turned to intercept. He didn't hesitate. He lunged, crashing into one man's leg and knocking him sideways. The second reached for a weapon, but Thomas tackled him from behind. The weapon clattered to the ground. One man down, the other disarmed. The handler stepped forward, finally speaking. "Stand down, R7. Ranger froze. The voice was familiar. It pulled at something buried deep inside him. "Return. Mission isn't over." Thomas stepped between them. "It is now." The handler looked him over. "You think you can protect him? He's not just a dog. He's a classified tool, one with loose ends." Thomas raised his voice. "He's not a tool. He's a survivor, and he made his choice." Ranger stepped beside Thomas. He stared at his former handler and growled. It wasn't rage, it was closure. The helicopter engine whined. One of the armed men shouted something unintelligible, and the group began to retreat. The handler lingered a moment longer, eyes locked with Thomas. "You're making a mistake," he said. Thomas nodded. "Maybe, but it's ours." The helicopter lifted off. Wind blasted through the clearing as it disappeared into the sky. Thomas looked at Ranger. The shepherd was shaking, but this time not from pain, from release. He was free. They returned to the boat in silence. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Thomas wrapped a towel around Ranger and leaned back against the deck. "You're not R7 anymore," he said softly. "You're Ranger, and this time no one gets to name you but you." The dog rested his head on Thomas's lap, and for the first time he closed his eyes, not because he was exhausted, but because, finally, he was safe. A week later. The ocean was calm again, the sky was clear, soft with spring sunlight, and on the edge of a quiet coastal town in Florida, a modest cabin by the bay had become something it hadn't been in a long time. A home. Ranger lay sprawled on the porch, head resting on his paws, eyes half closed. A warm breeze carried the scent of salt and jasmine. His body had begun to fill out again, stronger, more relaxed. The wounds on his legs were healing, but more than that, the tightness in his gaze was gone. The war behind his eyes had quieted. Thomas stepped out of the cabin carrying a bowl of grilled chicken and rice. "You better be hungry, that's the good stuff." Ranger's ears perked. He stood, stretched long and slow, and trotted over. No hesitation, no fear. He ate calmly, tail sweeping lazily behind him. When he finished, he sat beside Thomas, watching the waves roll gently onto the shore. Thomas took a deep breath. He still didn't know who the men in the helicopter really worked for. He hadn't heard anything since that day. Maybe they'd moved on. Maybe they were still watching. But the silence didn't feel threatening. It felt like acceptance. "Looks like they gave up," he said. "Guess they figured you were already home." Ranger blinked slowly. His body leaned against Thomas's leg. Later that afternoon, they went into town. The small pet supply store on Main Street had prepared something special. The owner, Linda, greeted them with a smile. "You must be Ranger," she said, crouching to eye level. "You've become quite the legend around here." Ranger sniffed her hand and gave one respectful tail wag. She held up a Trottom leather collar embossed in gold. Across the front was a single word, Ranger. Thomas took it with quiet reverence and knelt to fasten it gently around the dog's neck. "There," he said softly. "Your real name, no code, no number, just you." The next stop was the beach. Not the open sea, not where he had nearly drowned, but a quiet sandy stretch with shallow waves and children's laughter in the air. Ranger stepped cautiously onto the sand. The ocean sounds no longer made him flinch. Thomas tossed a ball gently down the shore. Ranger hesitated, then chased it. It wasn't fast, it wasn't graceful, but it was free. When he returned, tongue lolling, Thomas laughed. "You're officially a beach dog now." As the sun began to set, they returned home. The light turned golden. The cabin glowed in its quiet, sturdy way. Ranger curled up at the foot of the porch. Thomas sat beside him, arm resting on the dog's back. They stayed that way for a long time, saying nothing, because sometimes the most powerful things don't need to be said. Not all rescues start with a plan. Not all heroes wear badges, and not all broken things stay broken. Sometimes all it takes is being found. If this tale moved you, if you felt the tension, the heartbreak, and the triumph, please support our channel by hitting the like button and subscribing. Your support means the world to us and helps us bring more thrilling, emotional, and inspiring stories your way. Leave a comment below and let us know what you think. Do you believe dogs have an extraordinary sixth sense? Share your thoughts and personal stories with us. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.